You know, we had this idea that if you put a bunch of smart people in a room, you're going to get a great decision. It just makes sense, right? Collective intelligence. But what if I told you that the very dynamic of being in a group, that power of the majority, can actually be a destructive force, a force that pushes teams to make decisions that, get this, not a single person in the room actually wants. And that, right there, is the paradox of dangerous agreements.
Now, I know that sounds completely backwards, but the evidence is just overwhelming. We like to think that a group will catch individual mistakes, right? That they'll filter out the bad ideas. But so often, the social pressure inside that group creates brand new errors, leading to outcomes that are way worse than what any one person would have come up with on their own.
Seriously, think about it for a second. Maybe it was a weekend trip you didn't want to take, or a project at work you knew was a bad idea, or hey, even just picking a restaurant for dinner. You go along with it because you look around and it seems like everyone else is on board, but then you find out later, nobody really wanted to do it. This isn't just some awkward social moment. It's a perfect little window into a really powerful and, frankly, dangerous group dynamic.
So, to really get our heads around how this works, we've got to go back to a classic case study in communication failure. It's called the Abilene paradox, and our story begins on a horribly hot afternoon in Texas.
Okay, so picture this. You've got a family. They're sitting pretty comfortably on a porch playing a game of dominoes. It is scorching outside. The absolute last thing anyone wants to do is move. But then, the father-in-law, thinking, oh, everyone else must be so bored, suggests they all pile into their un-air-conditioned car and drive 53 miles to a cafeteria in a town called Abilene. It sounds like a truly terrible idea, because it is.
And this is where it gets really wild. Turns out, the father-in-law who suggested the trip, he secretly wanted to stay right there on the porch. His daughter, the wife, she only said sounds like a great idea because she wanted to keep her dad happy. The husband, he was dreading that long, hot drive, but he looked around, saw everyone else being quiet, and thought their silence meant they all agreed. And the mother-in-law? She had zero desire to go, but she sure wasn't going to be the one to speak up and ruin everyone's fun. They were all following a majority that was completely imaginary.
So here's the real kicker, the thing you have to understand about the Abilene paradox. This isn't a story about a failure to manage conflict. It's a failure to manage agreement. It's what happens when nobody in the group feels safe enough to voice what they actually think. And that leads to this collective decision that serves absolutely no one. The group literally agrees to do something that every single person in it privately thinks is a terrible idea.
As you can probably guess, this kind of thing doesn't just lead to miserable road trips. It scales up. It causes absolutely catastrophic failures in business, in politics, everywhere. This is where that little illusion of agreement builds into something much bigger and much more sinister: groupthink.
You can think of groupthink as the engine that drives a team straight down the road to Abilene. It's what happens when that deep human need to fit in, that desire for harmony and social cohesion, becomes way more important than actually making a smart decision. It's not that the people in the room are suddenly unintelligent, it's that their intelligence gets completely hijacked. Critical thinking just goes right out the window, and it's replaced by this desperate need for consensus, no matter how flawed that consensus actually is.
And believe me, this isn't just some abstract theory. This is real life. It's the corporate team that rolls out sales quotas that they know are impossible just so they can look aligned with leadership. It's the political circle that accepts a bit of corruption because, hey, that's just how things are done, and a culture of silence takes over. It's the engineers who falsify safety data because the pressure to hit a deadline is just too intense. In every single one of these cases, individuals privately know the path is wrong, but the group environment makes the bad decision feel like the only choice.
So why does this keep happening? Well, here's the paradox. Groups can be both smarter and dumber than individuals. It just depends on the problem. See, on problems where there's a clear, objective, right answer, we call this the logic effect, groups are fantastic. They catch each other's mistakes. But when a problem is subjective, when it's uncertain, which, let's be honest, is most big strategic decisions, the social effect takes over. That need for social harmony creates noise, and it actively messes with good judgment.
And this logic effect, it's incredibly powerful. There was a study way back in 1932 that found individuals trying to solve logic puzzles were only successful about 32% of the time. But when you put them in a group, that accuracy shot up to 65%. Groups are just mathematically better at filtering out those kinds of errors, which makes it even more baffling and frustrating when they fail so spectacularly on more complex social decisions.
So what are the ingredients for this kind of disaster? Well, it turns out there are about 6 pillars that hold it all up. Groupthink just loves it when a team is super tight-knit and cohesive. and when it's insulated from outside opinions. That creates this dangerous echo chamber where reality can't get in. Now, you add a high-stress situation, a dominant leader who makes their opinion known, and this immense pressure to conform, you've got a recipe for disaster. But the final nail in the coffin is often diffusion of responsibility. That quiet, paralyzing thought that, someone else will speak up, so nobody does.
But here's where it gets even scarier. Groups don't just make bad decisions, they often make extreme ones. There's this phenomenon known as the risky shift, and it's where a group discussion doesn't lead to a moderate, sensible middle ground. Instead, it pushes the entire group to take bigger, more dangerous gambles than any single person would have ever dared to take on their own.
Let's walk through an example. Imagine you're advising a friend on a huge career move. They can either take a safe, stable, but kind of low-paying job, or a really high-paying new venture that's super risky and unstable. If it were just you might advise caution.
But once you put that question to a group, the whole dynamic changes. Studies show that groups consistently push for option B, the riskier choice. And why? It's that diffusion of responsibility again. If the risky career move blows up in their friend's face, no single person feels the full weight of giving that bad advice. The blame gets spread out across the whole group, which makes the gamble feel psychologically so much safer to recommend.
Okay, now let's really raise the stakes. Imagine a person has to choose between living with a serious physical disability for the rest of their life or undergoing a very risky surgery that will either cure them completely or result in their immediate death.
This is chilling. Once again, groups are more likely to recommend the surgery, the ultimate gamble. No single person feels like they're going to have blood on their hands if the surgery fails. That group provides this psychological buffer that transforms a life-or-death decision into what feels like a bold and courageous choice.
And this risky shift isn't just some lab experiment. It has real, devastating consequences. And there's perhaps no more tragic and clear example than the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster.
On that cold January day, 7 astronauts lost their lives. And while the technical cause was a faulty O-ring seal, the root cause, the real cause, was human. This was the ultimate failure of group decision-making. It's where all of these destructive forces we've been talking about, groupthink, the risky shift, diffusion of responsibility, all came together at once.
You see, engineers had warned for years that the O-rings might fail in cold weather. It was a known risk. But through this process that's now called the normalization of deviance, which is when a known hazardous flaw is accepted over and over again without consequence until people stop seeing it as a flaw and start seeing it as normal, that danger was redefined. It became an acceptable risk. The immense pressure to launch on schedule created a powerful groupthink that just steamrolled the few dissenting voices. The group shifted toward the ultimate risk and lost.
7. That's the human cost of a bad group process. It's a number that serves as a permanent, painful reminder that consensus is not the same thing as truth, and that a quiet group is not always an aligned one.
So, if groups are so vulnerable to these epic failures, what on earth can we do about it? How do we protect our teams, our companies, and frankly ourselves from these powerful psychological traps? Well, the good news is there are defenses we can build.
The solution really lies in consciously fighting back against these natural tendencies. First, you have to actively seek out and reward dissent. I'm talking about celebrating the person who rocks the boat and challenges the popular opinion. That creates the psychological safety people need to speak up. Second, you have to get rid of the diffusion of responsibility. Make it crystal clear who owns a decision. No hiding in the crowd. Assign one single person who is accountable. And finally, you have to be constantly on guard for the risky shift. The second you feel that group energy pushing towards a big gamble, stop everything and ask the most important question. Would I make the same choice all by myself?
And that's really the question I want to leave you with. The next time you're in a meeting and you see everyone nodding along and everything seems to be moving forward smoothly, just take a second. Pause. Is that unanimous support a sign of a brilliant, unified plan? Or is it just the quiet hum of an engine, carrying a car full of silent passengers down a long, hot road to a place nobody ever really wanted to go?